All right, let's talk about starting a vocal mix and how to avoid some really common mistakes that people tend to make. I've seen so many students struggle through the process of mixing vocals, and I know that some of the things we're going to talk about today could have saved them hours and hours and hours of time. And so that's why I want to talk about this stuff today. That, and I have the session open. We recently tracked some vocals for it. This is a session you might have seen in a previous video. So it's a song that's a work in progress with myself and Evan Diamond for our Clans and Imes project. And we did a mic shootout previously. I have a video all about that if you want to see that. Maybe I'll put a card up on the screen for it. But what we decided is we liked this U87 clone the most for the song in this context. They're all good mics. We liked all of them, to be honest. But we did decide that we preferred the U87 clone for this one. So I'm not sure if these vocals are going to be the final version of the vocals, but I do have this take that's fairly unedited, and I figured I could talk a little bit about starting the vocal mix. Okay, so the first thing is to make sure that you get a good take while recording. And that can be a good take or good sections of takes that you can comp together. It doesn't have to be all one take. Not very many people can just record and do all one take and have it be exactly how they want. It's very common for people to comp. I think a lot of people that are just getting into this nowadays think for some reason that that's not a super common thing, but it is really, really, really very common. So, yeah, don't be afraid to comp your vocal takes and make sure that you get a good, clean recording going in, because there are some things that you don't want to postpone to fix in the mix, right? You want to make sure you have good mic placement. You want to make sure the performance has the emotion that you want, the details that you want. I can't do a whole lot to change the emotional output of the performance, for example, without making it super process sounding, right? And sometimes that's what you want, but sometimes it's not. So you want to make sure that you get the recording how you want it. Make sure to take the time during the recording process. Do not rush that process. So that's the first thing that I want to say. I see people trying to rush the recording process a lot, and it just causes frustration in the end and wasted time, honestly, in the mix process. A lot of wasted time. So make sure you get it right during tracking to the best extent that you can. So the next thing I don't always do, to be honest, I probably should. So maybe it's a do as I say and not as I do, but that's the idea of using pitch correction, even if it's just a little bit, even if it's very subtle. Most projects nowadays have some type of pitch, I can say this word, pitch correction. So for example, in this session, I have just, the auto mode of Auto-Tune Pro here on her track. So, and you can make the speed not super fast. You can add the flex tune thing in and the humanize so that it's not as obvious. You don't have to make it sound like, the T-Pain effect if you're using Auto-Tune or some type of tuner, Melodyne, whatever, what have you. But yeah, again, I occasionally see people or hear people talk about how they avoid using tuning on their vocals. And, even with performers that are amazing performers with wonderful sense of pitch, if you add a little bit of really subtle tuning on there, it might not even be one of those things where you consciously notice that it's a little more in tune, but it'll feel more polished. So give it a try, let me know what you think. But that's one thing I would recommend is don't poo-poo the tuning, Most projects nowadays have tuning on them again, so yeah, that's the second thing on my list. So the next thing I want to talk about is just kind of going through the take and finding breaths, noises, cutting out the noise in between when they're actually singing. And again, this will depend on the type of song you're working on. But if you have a whole bunch of different tracks in the session with the voice, then you can probably cut the gaps between when they're singing, and that negative space won't be noticed. So if you're working on a track where it's basically just the recording of a single voice and maybe like one other instrument, right? Then you might be able to notice if you have negative space like that. So again, use your ears. But the next thing I would do is kind of go through, and for example, I have some noise here. I'll play a few seconds of this just so you can hear it in context, and then I'm going to solo it.
Can you tell me that this is enough? Just a good feeling that I'm falling in love.
So yeah, that's it. Let me solo it, and I'm gonna actually, what is this? This is where my delay and stuff is. I'm gonna get rid of that. Let's listen to that.
Could you tell me that this is enough?
There's still a lot of reverb on there somewhere. Let's see. All right, so the reverb's gone. So this is what we have.
Could you tell me that this is enough?
So now I can hear a little bit more of the take. There's some of that kick popping through, but this should be enough to hear the actual vocal take and hear those like little noises between things and the breaths and stuff. So for example, I have some noise here. So I might trim that out unless I wanted that for whatever reason, right? And I'm going to hold Command to get between these grid lines. And this looks like a breath to me.
Could you tell?
So what I like to do is often keep the breaths. One thing that you could do, for example, is I'm going to hold Command to click between the grid lines and hit break. And I could, if I wanted to, for example, reduce the breath to make it a little quieter. And then, you just want to add a fade and then add a crossfade as well. I'm just holding Command to get these so that they're not jumping to the grid line because I am in grid mode here. I'm going to hit play.
Could you tell me that this is enough? Just a good feel.
And there's a good amount of f in there. So I might actually bump up this audio zoom here so I can really see what's going on. So that's probably this part's probably the f. So I'm not going to cut that. But as I keep listening, like there might be a little gap in there that I might want to get rid of. I'm just holding shift as I scroll my mouse to scroll left and right instead of up and down. This looks like it might have some noise, especially like right here. If that's not the beginning of a word, I might want to reduce that.
Sleep.
Yeah, so that was like a mouth sound. So what I might do is hold Command, highlight this, get rid of it. And sometimes I'll get rid of breaths, sometimes I won't. Sometimes if I like the sound of a little mouth pop, I might keep that in, especially if sometimes at the beginning of a word, it might add a little bit of like sass. But yeah, and you just want to make sure you're listening as you go too. So I'm kind of, jumping through this, but you want to listen and make sure you didn't cut off like the end of a word or something.
Sleep. I see.
And like that one, she didn't really do the end. What's the word here?
Honestly.
Oh no, she did. So let's see. So I'll just keep going through and finding anywhere where there's like a noise or a gap or something that might muddy up the mix and get rid of it. So like that, you can hear a little bit of the headphone mix in there, but I want the breath, so I might do this with it. You hear there's like a lot of noise in that one. She's kind of rustling around. So with that one, I would definitely do this. And that's kind of the idea. I would go through the whole thing and reduce any unwanted sounds, especially if this is backing vocals. I might reduce more of the breaths and more of like the k sounds and the words. But you don't want to like necessarily chop it all the way up and reduce all the breaths. But that's the idea behind that. And then what I also like to do is break out these chunks of vocals based on the loudness. So you can kind of see, right, with the amplitude of the sound, if it's bigger, it's probably going to be louder. So like this section here is going to be louder than this section here. So what I'll do is kind of go through and I will try to even that out ever so slightly. And I'll just break sections apart based on how loud they are. This song, she's kind of pretty even keel. Like this part is a little bit louder than the rest of everything. So I might kind of go through and I'm just going to really quickly chop this up, but I might kind of go through and boost a lot of these other sections that aren't quite as loud as this part. And that kind of helps you get a jump start on like your compression and evening out your dynamics and getting that vocal to sit on top of everything nicely. For example, I would definitely do it here where she's quiet. Let's listen though.
You follow me, honestly, yeah.
Yeah, so I already did that here. So if I return this to 0, you can see how much quieter it is than like here, right? And this is at 0, right? So there's a lot of dynamic range in the human voice. I'm going to do undo there. Command Z. And I think I've mentioned this in previous videos like a long time ago, but if you know how, for example, in Pro Tools, clip gain is before the plugin signal chain. So this is happening before it goes through all my plugins, whereas volume automation is after. So you can kind of take advantage of that, and you can get that dynamic control in various areas, right? So I can do this here before it goes through the plugins, and then add some volume automation afterwards, and it'll have a different effect than trying to do it all with volume automation, for example, right? So I do that. Another thing that you can do is you can go through and find areas where, for example, they're making a tss sound, right? And you can get a jump on your de-essing. So I don't know where that is here, but let's see.
Fills the room. I said, babe.
So there's,
I said, babe.
I have some effects coming in here. Let me choose a different spot.
Took a feeling that I'm falling in love. I've been hiding my heart for way too long, but you could figure it out. So maybe take me home.
So that's,
Oh, so maybe.
so I might find this might be it right here. This looks kind of like yeah. So I might break that out, and you can kind of see where it starts and ends, right? There's like a little dip in here, and then the waveform looks different than the waveform on either side here. And I might zoom way in and find like a little more exactly where it is, but I'm going to add like a little crossfade here. I might switch this to equal power. And then what I might do is bring this, I'm jumping around with my scroll here. I might bring this down slightly. I don't want it to be too extreme, but when I listen,
It out, so maybe
it's a little bit easier. And then when you combine that with an actual de-esser, right, it'll have a little bit of a bigger effect on softening that track. And again, it depends on how you want it to sound, right? So you may not want to do this, but that's something you can do. So again, we're talking about how vocals have a pretty extreme dynamic range, and this will depend on your style, like everything else, right? But adding compression. Ooh, and look, I'm clipping on my compression, so I might want to tweak that a little bit. But take the time to add your compression, to dial it in. You don't want to squish it too much, but adding compression to your vocals can really help it pop on top of everything. And I really love the LA2A. Lately, I've been using the Universal Audio one, to be honest. So let's see which one I've been using. I need to run I had a video about reducing this list, and I have to run it again because I just ran an update. But I have been using, here it is. The LA2A. I've been using this one a lot lately instead of the Waves one. So I might switch it to this one, to be honest. But yeah, there's, a whole range of different compressors you can use out there. I'm not like telling anyone to use a specific one. Experiment with them and see how you like them on your vocals, right? I really tend to like the LA2A, the plugins that mimic the LA2A on vocals a lot. So that's what I tend to reach for first at the very least. And another thing you can get into is using actual clip gain lines on these clips to help with things like the de-essing and the evening out the dynamics. And that gives you a little bit more control. It's a little more precise automation over time as compared to just doing the actual clip gain fader. So I do have a video about using clip gain lines, so I'm not going to dig into it here, but I'll put a card for that up on the screen for you. So I think I just have a couple more things to say here, but one thing is, if you've seen my channel, then you might have seen this before, but the idea that what I like to do when I'm mixing a lot of instruments, not just vocals, is I like to make an aux track for the dry signal. So I'll send all the microphones for whatever the instrument category is to a first aux track, and that's kind of like for the drier signal. I do have some distortion on this one, but it won't be things like delay and really extreme reverbs and stuff like that, or really usually if there's any reverb, I won't have it on this one. And this goes out to, your main mix, or if you have like a stem aux, it'll go out to that. And then I'll have separate aux tracks for things like my reverbs and reverbs and delays and things that are more like effects, right? And so I like doing that because it gives me a little more control over those effects. I can like EQ them after I run them through, stuff like that. I think I have a video on that as well. So I'm just going to put a card for that on the screen as well if I have cards left. And then the other thing that I think people tend to skip a lot, and this is not a good thing to skip, and this applies to all mixing, not just, starting a vocal mix, but it's the idea of listening to your mix at a quieter level to see how everything sits when it's quieter. If you've seen equal loudness curves, our brain actually picks up different frequencies at different levels differently. So the mix will sound like it's balanced slightly differently when you turn it down. Similarly, when you crank it, right? So a lot of people love to listen to their music really loud. I do that too. I love it. But you want to take the time to listen to your mix at a quieter level. And especially what I've noticed is oftentimes the vocals will pop out too much at a quieter level, or you'll feel if they're not sitting in the mix correctly, especially in terms of level. So listen to your mix at a quieter level. So yeah, that's it. Those are my thoughts for right now. That's all I have time for today. I hope this helps someone out there. Let me know what you think in the comments below, as always, and like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I'd appreciate all of that stuff. And I do have a Patreon, so it's patreon.com/CatoNoise. My patrons get access to additional content. We have a Discord server we're hanging out on. We're running a book club on there. That's all like audio engineering and music production. We get together in the voice channel, and oftentimes we don't really talk about the book all that much. We're just like nerding out about audio stuff. So if you want to join us, if you want to check some of that stuff out and you feel so inclined, please check out my Patreon. Again, patreon.com/CatoNoise. And other than that, I come out with new videos every Wednesday, and thanks so much for hanging out. Okay. And actually, this shirt that I'm wearing is merch from one of my friends from book club. So if you haven't checked out Sky Flying By, it's some amazing music. Go check them out.